Epoxy floor illusion, how the future froze beneath our feet. On one of those overcast November days in an old industrial district of Berlin where the air still carries the scent of machine oil and the dust of the last century, a local architect named Lucas Wagner opened the door of an abandoned workshop where wooden beams had rotted for decades and concrete had cracked and rust seeped down the walls, and he could not believe his eyes because the floor he stepped on seemed to have been poured from the future, being smooth and mirrored without a single seam and possessing a light shimmer as if a river of frozen light flowed beneath it, and yet it did not creak or bend, and it left no marks, even from heavy boots with metal heel plates. What was this? Glass? No, it was far too strong. Plastic? It felt too hard and cold to the touch. Marble? That would have cost a fortune and still would not look like this, which was like something alive yet frozen in a perfect form. Only after several minutes spent on his knees with a magnifying glass and a measuring tool did Lucas realize that before him was epoxy resin, but not just poured in a layer, but transformed into a real art object, into a floor illusion, into a technology that had long ago ceased to be the domain of garage craftsmen and entered the world of art and architecture and even the philosophy of being. Today, when you and I hear the phrase epoxy resin floor, the imagination usually brings up either a glossy surface in a modern loft with neon signs or a sterile white floor in a pharmaceutical laboratory. But few people consider that this technology is not just a way to cover concrete, but an entire system of views on space and durability, and on how a person can intervene in the laws of time and material to stop decay and fix a moment and turn a floor into a canvas and a workshop into a gallery. Epoxy resin is not just a two-component liquid that is mixed before pouring it. It is one of the few materials that allows one to literally cast space, like a sculptor casts a form in bronze. Only here it happens on the scale of a room or a hall or an entire building. And the most amazing thing is that this process, which at first glance seems incredibly complex, is available even to those who have never held a spatula if they know not just the sequence of actions, but the very logic of the material and its language and its rhythm and its secret laws, which strangely enough are very similar to the laws of a living organism because it reacts to temperature and humidity and the speed of mixing and even to how you breathe over it at the moment of pouring. We are going to dive into this story today, not as an instruction, because instructions are everywhere, and most of them are written as if a robot composed them for robots, but as a travel story about a journey from dusty concrete to glossy perfection, from the fear of a mistake to confidence in every movement of the brush, and from the perception of the floor as just a surface under your feet to the realization of it as the supporting foundation of the entire space, as the first thing the eye meets, and as a mirror reflecting the style and character and even the soul of a place. You will learn why some of the most expensive galleries in Tokyo choose epoxy floors despite the availability of marble and teakwood, and how in New York, an art group called Liquid Horizon poured an entire floor of an abandoned warehouse with resin embedded with particles of meteorite dust to create the effect of Earth strewn with stars. And why in Stockholm, a vaccine development laboratory requires the floor not just to be dust-free, but to be capable of withstanding chemical radiation and remaining sterile for 15 years without a single crack. And how in Marseille, a simple locksmith named Antoine turned his garage into an art residence by pouring the floor in 3 layers with fluorescent pigments that glow only under ultraviolet light, turning the night space into an underwater world. But before we go further, let us ask ourselves one simple question. Why is it that right now, in the 26th year of the 21st century, epoxy floors are experiencing a true renaissance? Is it really just a tribute to fashion? Or perhaps it is a reaction to our ever-increasing need for something unchanging in a world that changes at cosmic speed? Think about it. Because over the last 20 years, we have changed dozens of phones and several generations of cars and several versions of ourselves, and the floors in our homes, if we were lucky, were changed once a decade, and most often due to wear and tear. But what if you could create a floor that would serve not 10 or 20, but 40 or 50, and in some cases even 70 years? What if this floor would not just withstand loads, but become part of the architectural design and part of the narrative? What if it could change, not physically but visually, being strict and minimalist by day and turning into a galaxy by night? It is this potential, which is not just functional, but almost poetic, that makes epoxy resin the material of our time. So, let us start from the very beginning, from the moment when you stand in an empty room and look at the concrete base and think, where do I start? Many people immediately rush to the internet to search for how to make an epoxy resin floor, and they find dozens of videos where a young man in safety glasses confidently stirs a yellow liquid in a bucket, and they think it is all simple, just mix and pour and wait, and it is done. But in reality, even if you perform all the steps exactly according to the instructions, everything can go wrong. And the reason is not your inexperience, but the fact that epoxy resin is not paint that can be repainted if you did not like the shade. It is a chemical reaction, and like any reaction, it requires respect for conditions and proportions and sequence. Imagine that you are baking bread, but instead of watching the oven temperature and the humidity of the dough and the proofing time, you simply mixed flour and water and put it in the oven, and then you wonder why it turned out like a brick. It is the same with epoxy resin, as it is alive in a certain sense, and if you do not enter into a dialogue with it, then it will answer you with cracks and bubbles and cloudiness and peeling, which are all things that in professional circles are called the result of disrespect for the process. But do not be afraid, as I do not want to scare you. I want you to understand that this is not magic, but it is not just mechanics either. It is craft, and like any craft, it requires attention and patience, and a willingness to learn from mistakes, including those of others. Take, for example, a story from Melbourne, where in 25, a group of designers decided to pour the floor in a new coffee shop called Nebula Brew in the style of cosmic dust, using black resin with billions of microparticles of aluminum mica, creating the effect of distant stars. Everything went perfectly, including the preparation of the base and the priming and the first layer and the second layer, and everything dried flawlessly. But on the third day, when visitors had already started taking photos of the floors for Instagram, one of the tiles in the corner began to bulge. After 12 hours, the first crack appeared, and after a day, there was peeling over an area 60 centimeters in diameter. What went wrong? The mixture was perfect, and the proportions were exact, and the temperature was normal. It turned out that under the concrete screed, which everyone thought was dry, there was hidden moisture, which was only 2% humidity, but for epoxy resin, that is the same as standing in a puddle. It does not let steam through, as it seals it, and then the moisture, having no exit, begins. But do not be afraid, as I do not want to scare you. I want you to understand that this is not magic, but it is not just mechanics either. It is a craft, and like any craft, it requires attention and patience, and a willingness to learn from mistakes, including those of others. Take, for example, a story from Melbourne, where in 25, a group of designers decided to pour the floor in a new coffee shop called Nebula Brew in the style of cosmic dust, using black resin with billions of microparticles of aluminum mica, creating the effect of distant stars. Everything went perfectly, including the preparation of the base and the priming and the first layer and the second layer, and everything dried flawlessly. But on the third day, when visitors had already started taking photos of the floors for Instagram, one of the tiles in the corner began to bulge. After 12 hours, the first crack appeared, and after a day, there was peeling over an area 60 centimeters in diameter. What went wrong? The mixture was perfect, and the proportions were exact, and the temperature was normal. It turned out that under the concrete screed, which everyone thought was dry, there was hidden moisture, which was only 2% humidity, but for epoxy resin, that is the same as standing in a puddle. It does not let steam through, as it seals it, and then the moisture, having no exit, begins to push from below like steam in a pressure cooker, and at some point, bang, the floor bubbles. This is why the first stage of preparing the base is not just important, it is the foundation of all future success. And I will repeat this more than once, because even the most expensive resins and the most beautiful pigments and the most advanced additives will not save you if you ignore this step. Preparation is not just washing and vacuuming, it is diagnostics and surgery and almost detective work. Concrete is a treacherous material, as outwardly it may look monolithic, but inside it can be riddled with micro cracks and pores and residues of oil from old equipment and salts that over time come to the surface in the form of a white coating known as efflorescence. In 23, in Hamburg, during the restoration of an old warehouse into an art residence, builders discovered that under the top layer of the screed, there were traces of machine oil left as far back as 1958, and these traces, although invisible to the eye, did not allow the primer to bond with the base, which would have led to disaster 3 months after pouring if an adhesion test had not been conducted using the so-called 5-centimeter crosscut method. The essence of the method is simple, as you make a grid of cuts on a small area after applying the primer, then stick on a special tape and pull it sharply, and if the squares of primer stay in place, then the bond is good. But if they peel off, you need to grind further and degrease, and perhaps even apply a special primer for oil spots. In Hamburg, they had to carry out 3 cycles of grinding and use an industrial vacuum cleaner with a water filter so as not to raise dust, and only on the 4th day did they proceed to priming. But as a result, the floor today, 3 years later, looks as if it were poured yesterday. Now is the perfect time to talk about the resin itself. Many people think that epoxy is just one thing like milk or bread, but in reality it is an entire universe of formulations, each of which is created for its own task. There are resins for indoor spaces with low volatile organic compound content, which are almost odorless and have UV stabilizers so they do not turn yellow in the sun. And there are resins for the outdoors, being frost resistant and resistant to UV radiation, with additives that prevent slipping. There are also so-called thick layer resins for pouring layers from 10 to 50 millimeters without shrinkage, and there are self-leveling ones that spread by themselves like water but do not form waves. There are resins with a wet stone effect, being matte but deep as if the concrete had just been washed by rain. And there are the most impressive decorative resins that allow you to embed entire compositions into the floor, such as leaves or coins or photographs or even pieces of old books. In Barcelona, the artist Marta Soler in 24 created an installation called Memory of the Earth, where she collected soil from 50 different regions of Spain, from the Pyrenees to Gibraltar, and she sifted it and dried it and mixed it with transparent resin and poured it in the form of strips running from the entrance to the center of the hall. When the light falls at an angle, each strip shimmers with its own shade, like the red clay of Andalusia, or the gray volcanic dust of the Canaries, or the golden sand of Valencia. And all of this is frozen half a meter from the ground, like a map carved not on paper, but in space. But how do you choose the right resin? There is no universal answer, and this is exactly what scares beginners. But there is a logic. First, ask yourself 3 questions regarding where the floor will be, inside or outside, and what loads it will carry, such as walking barefoot or moving furniture on wheels, or the passage of a forklift, and what visual effect you want, such as a mirror gloss, or matte silk, or shimmering depth. The answers to these questions will narrow the choice down to 2 or 3 options. For example, if you are making a floor in a bathroom, you need a resin with anti-slip additives that is resistant to constant humidity and temperature changes. But if it is for a garage, you need it to be chemically resistant and able to withstand gasoline and oil and acids from batteries. And if it is for a gallery, you want it to be as transparent as possible with a high refractive index so as not to distort the colors of the embedded elements. And do not forget about the hardener, because it is not the second half, it is the catalyst for the reaction. And if the resin is the body, then the hardener is the soul. The same hardener can give different pot lifetimes, ranging from 20 minutes to 6 hours. In Copenhagen, a team of restorers once almost lost an entire batch of resin because they were counting on a 4-hour period, but got a 2-hour one and did not have time to pour an area of 30 square meters. In the end, they had to urgently call a second crew and work with 4 hands, and still a barely noticeable scar formed at the junction, which, by the way, was later turned into an artistic seam by embedding a thin copper thread there. Now let us talk about mixing. This is where the most dramatic part of the story begins, because it is at this stage that 90% of attempts fail. People take a drill with a mixer attachment and turn it on to the maximum and stir for 30 seconds and think it is ready. But epoxy resin is not pancake batter. When mixing, you are not just combining 2 liquids, as you are starting polymerization, and if the mixture is not uniform, or if a pocket of pure resin or pure hardener remains somewhere, then the reaction will proceed unevenly, being fast and hot in one place, and slow and sluggish in another, and in the end, you will get a surface that hardens in patches with areas of different hardness and internal stresses, and sooner or later it will crack. Proper mixing is a meditation. You take a clean bucket with no dirt and no moisture and not even condensation, and you pour in the resin first and then the hardener, strictly by weight and not by volume, because their densities are different, and you begin to stir, not quickly and not sharply, but smoothly in a circle from the bottom up for at least 5 minutes. And you do not do it in just one place, as you must transfer the mixture into a new bucket and repeat the process, which is called double mixing and guarantees 100% uniformity. In Toronto, there is a firm called Crystal Floor Labs that conducts masterclasses, and in the first exercise, they make all participants stir water with food coloring for exactly 5 minutes to feel the rhythm and the depth of movement, and to understand that this is not the work of hands, but the work of attention. The next stage is the pouring, and here too there are nuances that few people talk about. For example, there is temperature. Many people think heat is good and cold is bad, but in reality the optimal range is from 15 to 25 degrees Celsius. If it is too hot, the resin will set too quickly and you will not have time to level the surface. But if it is cold, the reaction will slow down and bubbles will begin to form in the resin because the viscosity increases and the air does not have time to escape. In Oslo, in 25 during the winter, a team tried to pour a floor in an unheated hangar at -2 and got a surface resembling a lunar landscape with millions of small craters from burst bubbles. This could only be fixed by full grinding and re-pouring with heaters and heat guns and thermometers installed in every corner. Another important point is the height from which the resin falls. You cannot just pour it out of the bucket because this creates turbulence and traps air. You need to use a special pouring trough or pour in a thin stream along a slat so that the resin spreads smoothly like lava. In Paris, the designer Émile Leroy Chai developed an entire technique called the wave method, where he starts pouring from the far corner and moves towards the exit, and each new stream of resin is laid on the previous one with a slight overlap so that the boundary remains invisible. And of course, there is leveling. This is where the needle comes into play. Not a medical one, but a special roller with long stainless steel needles that is rolled over the fresh resin to burst the bubbles and create a self-leveling effect. But even here there is a secret, because you need to roll it not immediately, but 5 to 7 minutes after pouring, when the resin has already started to thicken but has not yet lost its fluidity. If you do it too early, the needles will leave marks, and if you do it too late, the bubbles will already be frozen inside. In Buenos Aires, a master named Juan Carlos once worked at night and got tired and missed the moment, and in the morning he discovered that the floor was full of small dots, as if it had been bitten by thousands of mosquitoes. Instead of giving up, he added fluorescent pigment to the next layer, and now in daylight, the floor looks smooth, but at night, these dots glow like fireflies. But the most exciting part begins when you decide to go beyond a solid color coating. Because epoxy resin is not just protection, it is a canvas. Imagine that you can embed an entire story into the floor. In Krakow, in the old Jewish quarter, a memorial chapel was opened, and the floor there was made of black resin into which thousands of small glass beads were fused, each with a tiny piece of paper inside, on which the name of a child who died in Auschwitz was written. When the light falls from above, the beads shimmer, and it seems as if the floor breathes with sparks of memory. In Seoul, in a technology museum, the floor in the hall about artificial intelligence is made of translucent resin under which LED strips are laid that react to movement, so that the faster you go, the brighter the trajectory flashes, as if you are leaving a digital trail behind you. And in Cape Town, environmentalists created an installation called Ocean in Danger, featuring a floor made of blue resin with fused fragments of recycled plastic, such as bottles and caps and nets, and the inscription, "This is not decor, it is a warning." The possibilities are endless, but there are rules. Any element you embed must be absolutely dry and contain no oils and release no gases when heated, because polymerization is an exothermic process and the resin heats up to 60 degrees and higher. Leaves must be soaked in resin beforehand and dried, while coins must be degreased with acetone and photographs must be laminated or covered with a special varnish, otherwise the ink will bleed. In Mexico City, the artist Carlos Mendez once tried to fuse newspaper clippings into the floor without protection, and it turned out like in an old horror movie, because after a week the ink began to spread and the newspaper turned into a black mess as if it had been eaten by a shadow. And now the floor has hardened. 7 days have passed, or sometimes 14 depending on the composition, and you have removed the protective film, and before you is a smooth and flawless surface. But do not rush to celebrate, because the last stage is not the opening, but the entering. An epoxy floor reaches its full strength not all at once, and even if it is hard to the touch, the internal bonds continue to form for another 28 days. During this period, you cannot place heavy furniture or move it, or use aggressive cleaning agents.
In Dublin, a restaurant opened its hall 3 days after pouring, and the very first batch of chairs placed on metal legs without felt pads left microchips that, over time, turned into a grid of cracks. And in Lisbon, on the contrary, the owner of a boutique waited a whole month until she was sure the floor was ready, and she even conducted a test by placing a bottle of wine and dropping keys nearby. Because if the keys scratched the glass but not the resin, it meant the hardness had reached level 8 on the Mohs scale, and only then did she open the doors. Now for the care. Many people think that since the floor is so strong, it can be washed with anything. No, this is not the case. Epoxy resin is resistant to chemicals, but not to everything, as acetone and aggressive solvents and concentrated acids can damage the top layer. It is best to use neutral detergents and soft cloths, and once every 6 months apply a special wax for additional gloss protection. In Singapore, there is a hotel where the floors in the lobby were poured with epoxy with a frosted glass effect, and every morning the maids wipe them with microfiber with a drop of olive oil, not for shine, but so that static does not stay on the surface and dust does not collect. But the most important thing is the attitude. An epoxy resin floor is not just a coating, it is a decision. It is a decision to live in a space where there is no room for chaos, and where every detail is thought out, and where even what you walk on carries meaning. It is a choice in favor of durability in an age of disposability, and in favor of beauty in a world where only functionality is increasingly valued. And when you stand on such a floor, you feel not only its cold smoothness under your feet, but also confidence that this is not a temporary structure, but a part of the future that you created yourself. Therefore, I urge you, do not be afraid to start. Do not wait for ideal conditions or an ideal tool or an ideal day. Start small, with a small area or a simple solid layer, or one mistake from which you will extract more benefit than from 10 ideal videos. Buy a bucket of resin and read the instructions twice, and prepare the base as if you were preparing the soil for a seed, and pour it not for the sake of the result, but for the sake of the process, and for the sake of the feeling that you are not repairing a floor, but writing the first line in a new chapter of your life. Because every great floor began with one drop, and one thought, and one step forward. And who knows, perhaps it will be your floor that someone will one day walk into in an old industrial district and kneel down and say, "It cannot be. This is the future."